Shalom. Most people believe speed creates progress. Move faster, act quickly, respond immediately. Torah reveals something different. Results do not follow speed, they follow sequence. Welcome to Torah Mastery. This is episode 19. In the previous 18 episodes, we have established the foundational architecture. Structure determines outcome. Consistency determines direction. Leverage determines scale. Constraint creates power. Each of these laws operates beneath the surface of what most people can see. They are not motivational principles. They are not productivity frameworks. They are governing laws. And governing laws do not negotiate with preference. They simply operate. Today, we go deeper into the architecture of order, not the idea of order, not the feeling of being organized, the structural law that governs whether any effort produces its intended result. That law is this: order determines effectiveness, not intention, not effort, not speed, sequence. Before we enter the principle, we have to understand what we are working against, because the cultural assumption that surrounds most people today is not neutral. It actively opposes the law of sequence. And until that assumption is named clearly, it will continue to operate invisibly, distorting decisions, misaligning priorities, and producing confusion that looks like effort. That assumption is simple. Speed creates results. This is the foundational belief of modern culture. It is embedded in everything, in how businesses are built, in how decisions are made, in how people measure progress. If something is moving fast, it appears successful. If something is moving slowly, it appears to be failing. Speed has become the primary signal of value. Consider how this manifests in daily life. Emails demand immediate responses. Markets reward companies that move faster than competitors. Social media compresses entire conversations into seconds. News cycles collapse complex events into headlines. The speed at which information moves has trained an entire generation to believe that the speed of action is what separates those who succeed from those who do not. This is urgency culture, and urgency culture is not simply a preference for efficiency. It is a structural disorder. It has inverted the correct relationship between time and sequence. It has replaced the question of what comes first with the question of what can happen fastest. Urgency culture produces a specific kind of decision-making, reactionary decision-making, not strategic decision-making, not principled decision-making, reactionary, which means the trigger for action is not a principle. The trigger is a stimulus. Something happens, and the immediate response is to move, to do something, to act, to show momentum. The movement itself becomes the goal, because in urgency culture, movement is mistaken for progress. But movement and progress are not the same thing. Movement is physical displacement. Progress is ordered advancement toward a defined result. A person can move in many directions simultaneously and produce no progress. A person can move slowly in one precise sequence and produce profound results. The distinction between movement and progress is the distinction between speed and sequence. Torah has always understood this, not as a philosophical position, as a structural observation about the nature of reality itself. Now let us look at what happens when speed operates without order, because the consequences are not abstract. They are architectural. They are embedded in the structure of any enterprise that attempts to move fast without first establishing sequence. The first consequence is misaligned priorities. When urgency governs decision-making, the criteria for action shifts from what is foundational to what is visible. What demands attention in the moment displaces what deserves attention according to principle. The urgent crowd out the important. This is not a failure of willpower. This is a structural consequence of allowing speed to govern sequence. When the fastest moving item on the list automatically rises to the top, the items that build foundation never receive attention. The items that establish the sequence necessary for later results are perpetually deferred, and the result is a life or an organization that is constantly active and never actually advancing. Misaligned priorities are not solved by trying harder. They are solved by restoring the correct sequence, which means determining not what demands attention first, but what must be addressed first according to the architecture of the goal. These are different questions. Urgency answers the first, principle answers the second. The second consequence of speed without order is premature scaling. This is one of the most destructive errors that appears in business, in personal development, in any domain where growth is the goal. Premature scaling means expanding a system before the foundational layer of that system is sound. It means adding more before the existing structure can support more. The result is always the same. The expansion amplifies the weakness in the foundation. More resources flowing through a broken system do not fix the system. They accelerate the breaking. More people working within a misaligned structure do not correct the misalignment. They embed it deeper. Premature scaling is not a growth strategy. It is an acceleration of collapse. Torah's approach to scale is sequenced. Foundation precedes structure. Structure precedes expansion. Expansion precedes scale. These are not optional stages. They are not preferences. They are the natural sequence that the architecture of any system requires. Skip a stage, and the structure above it has no support. The height of what is built is not determined by ambition. It is determined by the integrity of what was laid beneath it. The third consequence is building before foundation. This is related to premature scaling, but it operates at an earlier stage. It is the error of beginning construction before the foundational work is complete. In physical architecture, this is obvious. No builder lays walls before the ground is prepared. No engineer installs the roof before the structure beneath it is load-bearing. The sequence is visible and therefore respected. But in the architecture of life, in the building of knowledge, character, wealth, and leadership, the foundation is invisible. It cannot be photographed. It cannot be shown. It does not produce visible output. And so urgency culture dismisses it. Urgency culture says, move to the part where results appear. Urgency culture says, skip the invisible work and begin the visible work. But the visible work has no durability without the invisible foundation. The results that appear without foundational sequence are temporary. They are structurally unsupported. And when pressure arrives, as it always does, the structure built without sequence cannot sustain it. The fourth consequence is emotional decision cycles. When speed governs behavior, decisions become responses to feeling rather than applications of principle. Enthusiasm produces action. Anxiety produces retreat. Excitement expands the plan. Discouragement contracts it. The cycle repeats. And because each phase of the cycle is governed by a different emotional state, there is no coherent sequence. There is only oscillation. Emotional decision cycles produce no net progress because they have no directional sequence. They have direction in each moment, but the directions contradict each other across time. Advance and retreat in equal measure produce the same position held before the movement began. The person working within emotional decision cycles is perpetually exhausted and permanently in place. Torah does not govern behavior through emotion. Torah governs behavior through law. Law does not change with feeling. Law applies regardless of the emotional state of the person to whom it applies. This is not rigidity. This is structural stability, the stability that makes sustained directional movement possible. Now we turn to the principle itself. Torah's understanding of sequence is not presented as advice. It is woven into the structure of creation, into the design of law, into the architecture of every system that the Torah describes. Sequence is not a preference within Torah. It is a governing reality. Begin at the beginning. Bereshit, in the beginning. The opening word of Torah does not describe the content of creation alone. It describes the architecture of creation. Creation did not arrive complete. Creation was constructed in sequence. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3. Each stage was distinct. Each stage was complete before the next stage began, and each stage provided the necessary foundation for what followed. Light before life, separation before structure, gathering before growth. The sequence was not arbitrary. Each element established the conditions that made the next element possible. Without light, the conditions for biological life could not exist. Without the separation of waters, land could not appear. Without land, vegetation could not grow. The sequence is not chronological decoration, it is architectural necessity. The deep implication of this is that creation itself, the model for all existence, operates according to sequence, not according to speed, not according to the wish of the Creator to see the final result immediately. The sequence unfolded through stages, each stage complete in itself, each stage necessary for the next. This is not incidental to Torah's understanding of order. This is the model from which all of Torah's sequenced law derives. Move now to agricultural law. The Torah's agricultural system is among the most precisely sequenced systems in all of Halacha. Shemitah, the sabbatical year, establishes that the land must rest after 6 years of cultivation. This is not a pause in productivity, it is the law of sequenced renewal that makes sustained productivity possible. Without the fallow period, the soil cannot regenerate. Without regeneration, future growth is compromised. The sequence of work and rest is not a concession to limitation. It is the structural design that enables long-term fruitfulness. Consider also the laws governing first fruits, orlah, and the progression of agricultural offerings. A fruit tree is subject to orlah for its first 3 years. The fruit during those years cannot be consumed. Only in the 4th year are the fruits brought as elevation offerings. Only from the 5th year onward is the fruit available for ordinary consumption. This sequence is not arbitrary restriction. It is the law governing the proper development of living systems. A tree that is permitted to produce fruit without allowing the early stages to complete their purpose does not thrive. The tree requires time in its proper stages to establish the root system, the internal architecture that makes sustained fruitful production possible. Torah encodes this into law because it is structural truth. Move to education. The Torah's approach to learning is entirely sequenced. The sequence is not optional. It is the structure of what learning is. A child begins with Aleph Bet. Not because Aleph Bet is the simplest available material, but because Aleph Bet is the foundational layer on which all subsequent learning rests. Before letters, there are no words. Before words, there are no texts. Before texts, there is no understanding of the oral tradition. The sequence is absolute, and within the tradition, it is respected absolutely. The Mishnah in Avot presents this sequence explicitly. 5 years for scripture, 10 for Mishnah, 13 for mitzvot, 15 for Talmud, 18 for marriage. Each stage is not simply a time period. Each stage is a structural layer that prepares the person for the demands of the next stage. Moving to Talmud before Mishnah is not ambition, it is structural disorder. The mind has not yet built the architecture that Talmudic reasoning requires, and structure cannot be invented from nothing. It must be built in sequence. This sequenced approach to education is not about age, it is about architectural readiness. The question is never, am I old enough for the next stage? The question is whether the previous stage is structurally complete. Has the foundation been laid to support what comes next? That is the sequenced criterion. That is the Torah standard. Move to financial law and financial maturity. Torah does not treat wealth as something that can be pursued in any order. Torah's legal and narrative framework consistently reveals a progression. Individual capacity before household management before communal responsibility before institutional stewardship. This progression is not always made explicit in a single text, but it is embedded in the structure of how responsibility is assigned, how leadership is cultivated, and how stewardship is earned throughout the framework of halacha and narrative alike. The laws of business and commerce in Torah, the laws governing weights and measures, honest dealing, the prohibition of interest in certain contexts, the obligations to pay workers promptly, all of these laws assume a matured, ordered relationship between a person and their financial dealings. They are not laws designed for someone in the early stages of financial formation. They are laws that govern the conduct of someone who has passed through the foundational stages and now operates within the full framework of commercial responsibility. The law assumes sequence because sequence is the structure through which the relevant capacity develops. Move to skill acquisition. Torah's understanding of chazaka, the legal concept of established presumption, reveals something important about how competence is understood within halacha. A chazaka is established after a consistent pattern has been demonstrated across multiple iterations. 3 times, not once, not twice. 3 times establishes a presumption sufficient to govern legal decisions. This is not an arbitrary number. It is the structural threshold at which a pattern has demonstrated its reliability. Skill is the same. A person who has performed a task correctly once has not yet demonstrated the structural reliability of that capacity. The capacity must be repeated, layered, refined across multiple iterations before it constitutes a stable foundation for the next stage of competence. Urgency culture wants the skill immediately. Torah's framework says the skill is acquired in stages, and each stage provides the foundation for the next layer. There is no shortcut to structural competence because structure cannot be compressed. Now move to the practical implications, and here we apply the law. Not as advice, not as strategy, as structural implication. If order determines effectiveness, then the question in every domain is not, what can I do fastest? The question is, what is the correct sequence for this domain, and what stage am I in? In wealth building, the sequence structure is this. Productive capacity precedes capital accumulation. Capital accumulation precedes investment. Investment precedes sustainable passive income. This sequence is not a financial strategy. It is an architectural description of how wealth is built. A person who attempts to begin with investment before they have developed productive capacity and accumulated meaningful capital has violated the sequence. The investment will fail, not because the investment itself is flawed, but because the foundational stages that make successful investment possible have not been completed. The person who develops productive capacity first, who builds the skills and disciplines that generate reliable income before attempting to allocate that income into investment vehicles, is following the correct sequence. and following the correct sequence is what makes the later stages structurally sound. It is not patience for its own sake. It is the structural necessity of laying each layer before the next layer is added. In business growth, the sequence structure is this. Proof of concept precedes process development. Process development precedes team building. Team building precedes systems architecture. Systems architecture precedes scale. A business that attempts to scale before its systems are sound will not succeed at scale. The systems that are insufficient at small volume become catastrophically insufficient at large volume. Scale amplifies whatever is present. If what is present is structural integrity, scale amplifies integrity. If what is present is structural disorder, scale amplifies disorder. The business owner who refuses to scale until systems are in place is not moving slowly. They are moving in correct sequence, and correct sequence produces results that are durable. Results built on complete foundational stages do not collapse under their own weight. They sustain and build further. In personal discipline, the sequence structure is this. Habit formation precedes character development. Character development precedes principled decision-making. Principled decision-making precedes reliable performance under pressure. A person who attempts to perform reliably under high-pressure conditions before they have developed the underlying character through habit formation and principled practice has violated the sequence. The capacity to perform under pressure is not an original endowment. It is a structural result of the layers that precede it. Musar, the tradition of character refinement within Torah practice, operates entirely on this sequenced understanding. You do not begin with the highest level of character refinement. You begin with the most foundational trait, work through that trait systematically, and then move to the next. The sequence is determined by the architecture of character, not by preference or urgency, and the result of working in correct sequence is that each trait developed provides the foundation for the next trait to be developed properly. In learning mastery, the sequenced structure is this. Exposure precedes comprehension. Comprehension precedes analysis. Analysis precedes synthesis. Synthesis precedes application. A student who attempts to apply before they have passed through comprehension and analysis has no structural foundation for the application. The application will be surface level at best, incorrect at worst, and non-transferable across contexts in either case. The Torah scholar who sits with a text until comprehension is genuine, who then moves to analysis until the internal structure of the argument is visible, who then works toward synthesis across multiple texts and traditions, has built a body of knowledge that is architecturally sound. That knowledge will hold under questioning. It will apply correctly across novel situations. It will deepen further study rather than confusing it. The sequence of learning is what produces mastery, not the volume of material covered, not the speed at which texts are encountered. The structural sequence through which understanding is built, layer by layer, is what produces genuine depth. In leadership development, the sequenced structure is this. Self-governance precedes household governance. Household governance precedes communal leadership. Communal leadership precedes institutional authority. This sequence is explicit in Torah narrative and embedded throughout halachic framework. A leader who has not governed themselves cannot govern others. A person who has not managed the smaller domain of household responsibility does not have the structural experience necessary for communal responsibility, and communal leadership is the necessary training ground for institutional authority. This is why the Torah consistently shows us leaders who pass through stages. Moshe does not arrive at the leadership of a nation without first passing through stages of development that were in themselves forms of preparation. The tending of Yitro's flock in the wilderness is not an interruption of Moshe's leadership journey. It is a stage in the sequence. The qualities of care, attention, patience, and responsibility demanded by shepherding are the same qualities that leadership of a nation requires. The stage was not incidental, it was sequential preparation. Now we address the misinterpretations, because the law of sequence is consistently misread in two directions, and both misreadings produce distorted behavior. The first misreading is that sequence is procrastination. This is the most common confusion. A person hears the principle that order determines effectiveness, and they interpret it as permission to delay beginning. They say they are following the correct sequence, but what they are actually doing is avoiding the discomfort of beginning. Procrastination is not sequenced behavior. Procrastination is the refusal to begin the correct stage. Sequence means beginning each stage at the correct time and completing each stage before moving to the next. Procrastination means not beginning. These are not the same thing. Sequence requires activity at every stage. The activity at the earlier stages is simply different from the activity at the later stages. The person in the foundation stage must work on the foundation. Not delay the work. Work on the correct thing for the current stage. That is sequence. Sitting and waiting is not sequence. It is avoidance. The second misreading is that order is delay. This misreading comes from measuring progress by the most visible output, the final result, and then concluding that any time spent on earlier stages is time lost. But this is the urgency culture inversion again. It measures by final output rather than by architectural integrity. A building that takes 18 months to construct properly is not behind a building that took 6 months and fell. The building that took 18 months has produced a durable result. The building that took 6 months has produced nothing except the illusion of progress followed by collapse. Order is not delay. Order is precision. Order is the correct arrangement of actions across time so that each action performs the function it is designed to perform. When actions are out of order, they do not simply perform their function more slowly. They fail to perform their function at all. A foundation laid after the walls are up is not a late foundation. It is a useless foundation. The walls cannot be lifted to insert the foundation beneath them. The sequence cannot be reversed without destroying the structure. Order is not a preference about timing. It is the structural requirement that makes each action effective. The third misreading is that patience is passivity. This is perhaps the most important correction. Torah's sequenced approach requires patience, not the patience of waiting and doing nothing, the patience of sustained work at the appropriate stage, without premature movement to a later stage. This is active patience. It is the discipline of remaining in the foundational stage long enough for the foundation to be genuinely complete. Not just complete enough to appear ready, complete enough to be structurally sound. Passivity is the absence of action. Active patience is sustained, disciplined action at the correct stage. The Torah scholar who spends 5 years in intensive Mishnah study before advancing to Talmud is not passive. They are actively building the architecture of knowledge that will make Talmudic analysis structurally possible. The person who accumulates capital before investing is not passive. They are actively developing the productive capacity and financial discipline that will make investment decisions structurally sound. The difference between passivity and active patience is that passivity does nothing. Active patience does the correct thing for the current stage, for as long as the current stage genuinely requires. Urgency culture cannot distinguish between these two because urgency culture does not understand stages. Urgency culture sees any behavior that is not producing the final visible result as equivalent to non-production. But the Torah framework understands that every stage of the sequence is productive. The production at the foundational stage looks different from the production at the final stage. But it is not less necessary, it is more necessary, because the final stage is only possible when the foundational stage has been completed properly. Now we arrive at the closing, and here we do not summarize, we do not review, we do not offer encouragement. We state what the law produces. When the sequence is followed, the result is not just more efficient than speed alone. The result is categorically different. It is a result that holds, a result that supports further development, a result that does not require constant correction and reconstruction. Speed without sequence produces results that are temporary. They appear, they collapse, they require rebuilding, and they are rebuilt, often in the same wrong sequence, producing the same temporary result. The cycle repeats indefinitely. This is not failure of character. It is structural consequence of violating architectural law. Sequence without urgency produces results that are permanent. They are built on what came before. They support what comes after. Each result is a stage, and each stage enables the next. The progression does not accelerate by rushing. It accelerates by completing each stage so that the next stage has a complete foundation to build upon. This is the architecture of sustainable advancement, not the appearance of rapid movement, the reality of ordered construction. The person who understands this law does not look at their current stage with anxiety about the stages they have not yet reached. They look at their current stage and ask what this stage requires, what foundation must be laid here, what must be completed before the next stage can begin on sound ground. These are the only questions that produce durable answers, and those questions are answered not by speed, not by urgency, not by reactionary response to external pressure. They are answered by understanding the sequence, identifying where in the sequence you currently stand, doing the work of the current stage, and trusting, not out of optimism, but out of structural understanding, that a completed stage enables the next stage. The law is not motivational. The law does not need to encourage. The law simply operates, and those who align with it receive what the law produces. Sequence is not a method. Sequence is the structure through which results become possible. Order is not a preference. Order is the condition upon which effectiveness depends. Foundation is not a phase to be completed quickly so that the visible work can begin. Foundation is the work, the stage upon which all visible work depends for its durability. What is built in order holds. What is built out of order fails. What follows the correct sequence advances. What violates the sequence exhausts itself in place. These are not principles to consider. They are architectural facts of the domain in which you are working. Foundation precedes structure. Structure precedes growth. Growth precedes scale. Scale follows sequence. Order precedes strength. Strength precedes scale. Scale follows sequence. This has been episode 19. The law continues.